Everybody, we're going to get the meeting to order, please. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Transportation Committee meeting of Wednesday, October 11th. If everybody could please take a seat. Welcome to the Transportation Committee meeting of Wednesday, October 11th, National Coming Out Day. I am joined, I'm Mike Bond, the chair. I'm joined by my colleagues Paul Koretz, Nuri Martinez of the 5th and the 6th districts. We are going to get started. We have two people who have multiple public comment cards. Mr. Previn, you can have 2 minutes for items 7 and 8 and a minute for general public comment. Please come on up.
Separate to the Vision Zero item?
Nope, that's everything.
It is inclusive?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I wonder if I could point out that Mr. Spindler and his puppet have been talking and shouting and disrupting the meeting already.
So Mr. Spindler's only warning is being issued now. Another disruption, and Mr. Spindler will be asked to leave.
Thank you. It's Eric Previn from CD2, and I appreciate the comment from your puppet, Mr. Koretz. Well done, sir. Item number 7 is I believe it's the Joint City Administrative and Chief Legislative Analyst report relative to street reconstruction and, of course, the Vision Zero program. So this is an important program, and I think Angelenos are widely supportive of improving and reducing road deaths to next to nothing as best we can. Today, unfortunately, we settled a lawsuit for $15 million downstairs for a pedestrian who was tragically hit at what can only be described as an unsafe intersection. Of course, the city knew for a long time it was an unsafe intersection. I believe there was confusion about the airbag. There was a big, famous transportation consultant who got brought in, and I'm worried that it was the testimony of that guy that buried us in this one. It's so important with these cases, and there have been over $20 million in the last 1 year on bicycle-related claims against the city, whereas in the previous 10 years, there were only $6 million claims, worth of claims. So it raises the question, what has changed, and what are we doing to expedite the improvement of these streets? I think in the handling of the lawsuits, one very important detail is to recognize when we have liability and recognize when there's damages. But I think one of the problems I saw in some of the bike claims was the city's first position under the esteemed bad leadership of Mike Feuer was to try to blame someone for the situation rather than owning up. In the case of the Godefroy bicycle case, they tried to blame a resident who lived nearby, and maybe the tree was blocking. This guy was riding over the speed limit and hit a pothole on a non-bicycle friendly street. So many Angelenos threw their hands up in the air, even though we are incredibly sympathetic to anybody who's injured. Although he was injured and seriously, but he did manage to tweet or Facebook from New York, whereas he was not able to meet with the city attorney at all for 2 years. He was just booked or something. And by the way, did not speak to the LA Times after that historic settlement. So I'm just concerned that we do a better job and that there are cases where we absolutely have to hire an outside counsel to help. I know on the $15 million debacle downstairs we did, but on many we don't. And it's worth noting at the county yesterday for benchmarking, they settled a case for a bicyclist who went off the edge, sir, near Mulholland. And congratulations, by the way, Mr. Koretz, for those who don't know, rode his bike. I know you like to pull the room sometimes, sir. You didn't do it today. He rode to San Francisco in 1996, all by himself, people power. So we're very, very appreciative. The county case settled when he went over the edge. The poor guy died. His family got $800,000. But it's important to note the county hired a very good firm, take a note, Collins, and Muir, who spent almost $400 and something thousand fighting. So that was capped at a $1.3 million liability. And the guy was racing down a treacherous place. So
Thank you, Mr.
I
President.
appreciate your time, sir. Good luck with the Vision Zero program.
Mr. Spindler, you have a total of 3 minutes, one of which can be used for general public comment
Oh, yes, very good.
for matters pertaining to issues from the
Yes.
Transportation Committee.
And again, hello to the fat pig. Yes, so we get to number 5, the city's taxi cab franchises. What concessions are you giving these people? They're restricted by Uber And Lyft, fuck them out of all their business. Taxi cabs are supposed to be exclusive medallion holders like New York City. You're not giving the taxi cabs anything to compete with Uber and Lyft. So you have to give them less restrictions and more ability to compete in today's market. The pig always supports the taxi cab industry. Yes, once upon a time, Peppa Pig Koretz used to do that, but he became an Uberist. And then Mike Bonin rides his bicycle, if he ever shows up to work here. And then Nuri's a little bit on the fence, yes. So now we get to number 6. All you city employees, you're in trouble. Look at number 6. You know what they're going to do? They're going to stop you from using those placards to park free on the streets. Yes, because you know, like all of us that have those placards, we go to the doctor and give them a couple of $100. In the case of Nuri, maybe a small bag of dope. And then you get your placard and you park for fucking free everywhere in the world in California. But now they're trying to defeat your boondoggle. So on behalf of the SIIU employees, on behalf of all teachers and all city workers, fuck number 6. We want you to continue to abuse the placards. We want you to continue to get free parking because at $6 an hour you think I'm going to park my fucking van there? No. So continue to abuse the placards. I support this boondoggle. No on number 6. I move that Nuri moves to receive and file number 6. In other words, stop this shit now, yes. And then, of course, downstairs, did you know they gave $15 million to a lawsuit on a pedestrian versus auto? They gave away $15 million of your pension money. Why? The pig knows, because on May 23rd, an accident reconstructionist gave a deposition and he told the city some bad shit. So we're going to do a Public Records Act and we're going to get the deposition and see what that nice man said that scared the shit out of all of you to get $15 million on a defective airbag case. Anyway, happy hunting, bitches. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spindler. All right. Colleagues, I was going to recommend for consent approval items 1, 2, 8, and 9. Does anybody have any objections? Okay. So items 1, 2, 8, and 9 are approved. That will bring us to item number 3.
Item number 3 is a city attorney report and ordinance relative to amending the municipal code which prohibits the parking of a vehicle displaying a for sale sign or placard advertising.
Mr. City Attorney?
Do we have anybody here from the council office or LAPD to testify? If not, we have to put it over.
I will hold this on the table, and can we contact CD10 and see if they're sending a representative up? That will bring us to item number 4.
Item number 4 is a city attorney report and ordinance relative to amending the same section of the municipal code prohibiting the parking of a vehicle displaying a for sale sign or placard advertising the private sale of the vehicle on certain streets and related matters.
Okay, and I believe, Mr. City Attorney, this needs a technical correction?
Yes, it does. We're adding the word or marking to the definition of what a for sale sign is, and that is just a simple change to
Okay.
the definition.
Colleagues, any objection to approval with that change as read into the record by the City Attorney? Okay, no objection, so that item is also approved. That brings us to item number 5.
Item number 5 is a DOT and city attorney report and ordinance relative to proposing amending the city's current 9 taxicab franchise agreements for an additional 2-year period effective January 1st, 2018 through December 31st, 2019.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Jarvis Murray. I'm the taxicab administrator for the LA DOT. And this is just a simple extension request Primarily, the franchises expire at the end of this year. As you know, we've had a taxi cab franchise system here in Los Angeles since the 1990s, and their contracts are generally on 5-year terms. There was a 2-year extension given in 2015, and here we are in 2017, and the current franchises expire December 31st. We're requesting an extension through December of 2019, primarily because we've gone out for a consultant to do a study related to taxi cab franchising and the system in general. One of the reasons we want to make sure that there's no interruption of service is because one of the main things that the franchise you're able to do is we're able to control vehicle quality standards as well as service standards and wheelchair accessibility standards. And without the franchises at this time, we would have a lot of difficulty in doing that. So we do request that we move forward until December of 2019, and while we simultaneously have the study being done and begin hopefully implementing whatever changes that may have come out of that study during the year of 2019.
And we had originally asked, I think, for either a 1 or 2 year for both options, but as I understand it, this is asking for a maximum of 2 years, but we have the ability to terminate it sooner if we desire?
That's correct.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kress, did you have questions?
So by just extending it, we don't address any of the issues of unfair competition and having to provide services that the other TNCs don't provide.
When you extend a franchise, you can't change the terms and conditions. It's similar to the gas company where we have done this several times while we're negotiating a new contract with them. Therefore, we have to be under the same terms and conditions as the current franchise that we have with the taxi cab industry.
So would we be better off doing just a year so we could attempt to address those issues sooner, or is a year not enough time for
A year
steps to be taken?
is simply not enough time. But I can state that in the interim, it's not as if we would just leave the rules as is. We do have rules and regulations that we can work with. I've been trying to work with the taxi cab companies. Most of them are at a convention this week at the TLPA in Denver. But I've spoken, for instance, with one of our larger companies about sitting down and going over some of the easier rule changes that we can make that will help to impact their business and improve their business, as well as level the playing field. So I've been in talks with other cities regarding reciprocity issues, as well as giving them some space to work on newer technologies, i.e. soft meters and things of that sort that will allow them to, compete on a level that without having to install all of the additional hardware that currently they're under the gun having to install.
So this wouldn't slow down that process?
No, this wouldn't change that process. It would just keep the current process intact while we work on rules and regulations. But we'll also be having an independent outside consultant come down and work with us to inform us what may be the correct way to go in the future.
Salita Reynolds, General Manager, just wanted to add a couple of things that we've done this year. One, we lowered their franchise fees by about 30%, the maximum amount allowable administratively by the Commission. So we lowered their fees in order to reduce that administrative burden. And then we also eliminated something that had long been a hurdle for people to become new taxi cab drivers in the city of Los Angeles, which was the MAP and driver exam, and replaced it with customer service training. And we're able to, just by that change, increase the number of drivers by...
we increased it by about 80%.
80%. We were able to bring in 80% more drivers. So we're very committed to trying to do as much as we possibly can in an aggressive way to help them with both maximizing the number of drivers they have and reducing to the extent that we can the fees that the city imposes. So I think we're going to continue to do things like that we can do. And I'm hopeful that the work that the consultant will do is really in the interest of leveling the playing field, that's the sort of guiding principle of the study.
Very good. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, I have two questions. So the report notes that in 2006, we collected about $1.9 million in franchise fees from the 9 taxi cab franchisees. Does this fluctuate based on how many, the usage of taxis? And how has the revenue changed over the past 4 years?
It does fluctuate in terms of the number of vehicles on the road, but there's a maximum authorization that's currently out there. We're currently maximum authorized at 2,364 vehicles.
2,000 and what?
2,364 vehicles.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if that was a 2006 number. I think that might have been last year's number, the 1.9 million.
I
And
thought it was 2006 is what I read in the report. But do you think that was last year's numbers?
1.9 million, yes, I believe that's what we collected last year. But this is
Sounds like that was a typo, and there should have been a 1 instead of
Okay.
2006, 2016.
right.
Okay.
But that being said, that is how the fees are calculated. Part of that is due to their vehicles and the number of vehicles. So we have 9 franchises. They have their own fees, but then there's
So
also
based
vehicle
on
fees.
the use of taxis.
The number of vehicles that are
Right.
used,
Okay.
correct.
And so besides reducing their franchise fees, which you talked about, and making it easier for drivers to become taxi drivers, what are other things that we can be doing? Or perhaps, let me rephrase that. What are other cities doing to maintain or assist the taxi cab industry?
So one of the things that the city of Long Beach did, for example, was to remove the cap, right? So Uber and Lyft don't have a cap on the number of vehicles that are circulating in the city at any given time. That's something that the taxi cab drivers and owners are not in alignment on whether or not that's a good idea. There's a difference of opinion, right? Drivers are concerned that if there's no cap on the number of vehicles, there's a smaller pie for them. The other thing that we've tried to do, and we're not successful doing, but I think we'll go back and try again, that other cities do, is to come up with a flat rate from the airport, right? So the airport is one of the last remaining lucrative sort of market share for taxis in Los Angeles. Although it's worth noting that their market share in traditionally underserved neighborhoods like South LA has increased quite a bit over the last few years, which is a good thing. But as Uber and Lyft are now allowed to drop off and pick up at the airport, we expect that market share to decline. So we were looking for ways to help them maximize their competitiveness and offer flat rates from the airport. Again, the drivers and the owners were not totally aligned, and so we're working on getting them sort of on the same page. So those are some examples. I think removing the cap would be one of the most powerful things we could do. But again, it's a collaborative sort of process, and that's one thing that I'm hoping we'll get from the consultant report.
That's it, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So no objection then to approving this item? Okay. So that item is approved. That brings us to item number 6.
Item number 6 is a DOT report relative to the California Disabled Placard Parking Program reform.
Good afternoon. Ken
Good
Husting with
afternoon.
LADOT. And I try to see if my colleague is here from the Department on Disability. Probably be showing up a little bit later. Nonetheless, I'm here to present the report and the recommendations for the Los Angeles Accessible Parking Policy Advisory Committee and to seek the City Council's endorsement of the report. So this report is a culmination of nearly a year's worth of work. Now, the committee was formed at the request of the mayor to identify and understand the complex issues surrounding accessible parking, and also to develop recommended solutions to any of the problems around accessible parking. So this committee was comprised of the co-chairs, which was led by the general manager of LADOT as well as the general manager of the Department on Disability. And the committee was comprised mainly of disabled advocates. Some of those advocates were our own commissioners on disability from LA, and then also transportation and community representatives. Now, the group was tasked with coming up to a consensus to see if there actually is a problem that needs to be addressed. Assuming that there is a problem, they were supposed to create goals, criteria for evaluating the potential solutions to that problem, and then as well as evaluate and propose a broad spectrum of solutions to deal with that problem. So the committee was presented with many examples of placard abuse and misuse in the city, as well as unintended consequences as a result of the current state law. And we also presented hard data that we've gathered from our LA Express Park, which shows that over 40% of occupied time in Okay. All right.
Okay. Mr. Spindler, please leave. You're interrupting the meeting. Please leave. Mr. Herman, you've had your only warning. Please continue.
Thank you. So something that was really important that I needed to emphasize was that we had hard data from our LA Express Park project in downtown LA and Westwood that showed that over 40% of the occupied time in downtown LA, and some studies even show 50% of the time in Westwood, was occupied by disabled placards. So those are people that are staying well beyond the time limits and not paying for the parking. Now, I say this professionally, in my opinion, that the single greatest thing that we can do to transform parking in LA as well as across the state, more so than LA Express Park, and I'm a huge advocate for LA Express Park, is disabled placard reform. That's the single greatest thing that we can do. So needless to say, when we presented the data to the committee did come to an agreement that there is a problem that needed addressing. And so after holding multiple meetings between July 2016 to April 2017, the committee reached a consensus on the following recommendations on how to address the problem that they identified. And so it's actually comprised of 10 different recommendations and a broad spectrum going from enforcement to marketing to policy changes.
Before you get into the specific recommendations, sure. I just want to underscore something you said and tease it out a little bit. Abuse of handicap placards is so widespread and so prevalent that it is severely impacting the city's parking inventory and causing a problem for people with disabilities and without disabilities to find available parking when they need it.
Absolutely. So when we talk about improving parking, it's not improving parking for just a certain group, it's improving parking for all users. And in many cases, we've found that the people that need parking the most, the disabled folks, are not able to find parking because you have other able-bodied people that are misusing or even abusing the placards. And in certain cases, in discussing with the Department of Motor Vehicles, we found that people have been issued multiple, possibly even dozens of placards, and they're able to get those placards for free, report it lost, stolen, and then continue to get replacement placards.
So you mentioned that in some parts of downtown, 40 to 50% of the available parking inventory is being used by placards.
Absolutely.
And I thought I heard the other day, correct me if I'm wrong, that up to 80% of the vehicles on Hill Street are using placards?
Actually, we heard that it depends. I mean, on certain areas in downtown LA where the prices are the highest, based on demand-based parking pricing, it's 100%, just occupied by disabled placards.
100%.
And we have pictures of that. And even where we have 15-minute meters over at Will Call for the music center, which was intended for the high turnover, those are occupied either by disabled placards or city vehicles.
So I want to tease out a little bit about how this happens. How are, under the current system, placards allocated? Who can authorize them?
So right now, you're able to have midwives, chiropractors, different types of doctors, nurse practitioners, all types of professionals be able to assign placards to people that they believe deserve a placard. And right now there is such an incentive to have disabled placards because you're able to park beyond the posted time limits. It's actually unlimited unless you have to move because it's a tow-away, no stopping. And then also you don't have to pay for parking. And so in many cases, even though some people there may be more accessible parking within the building that they work, they might have to pay for parking in that building. And why not just go ahead and park right outside that building for free all day? And that's what happens across the city, Hollywood, Venice, Westwood. And this is not just something that's unique to the city of Los Angeles. This is prevalent in West Hollywood, Beverly Hills, Culver City, Oceanside, San Diego, San Francisco, on and on. So it's just that LA is doing something about it, and we put together the Los Angeles Accessible Parking Policy Committee to be able to do something about that. And again, this group was made up of mainly disabled advocates. And so we want to make sure that we looked out for all sides and that we took into consideration the special needs that they have.
And is it true that it is so easy to get a replacement placard that there's someone who has dozens, maybe even 50 of placards in their name?
That's correct. And matter of fact, it's rather easy to get fraudulent placards.
And then you just sell them
Yes,
outside of the DMV office.
yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
And-
DMV is addressing this. They are making policy changes. But the problem is that as long as the incentive is there, which is free parking all day, you're going to continue to find ways to get around the system and continue to have the abuse.
And if there's an area that has an oversized vehicle restriction and they have a placard, are they allowed to be exempt from the oversized vehicle restriction?
No, they're not.
Okay.
But you can if you're in a preferential parking district.
Okay. So in the development of the recommendations you're about to enumerate for us, you made it very clear that the disability community was a majority of this committee that worked on the recommendations. Did this committee also look at best practices about what other jurisdictions have done?
Yes, we looked at dozens of different policy options, dozens of different enforcement. We looked at all kinds of facets of how to address this problem, and these were the 10 that we came to a consensus on as a
Okay.
group.
Please go ahead.
The other states do.
I'll get to that with the two-tier.
Okay, please go ahead then.
Okay, so the first one, and there's 10 of them, marketing campaign on the implications of the misuse of placards. So again, just being able to put money or resources towards letting people know, how are they misusing it? And sometimes there is ignorance involved, and people may not understand that they're actually taking away parking from somebody who truly needs it. Clarify placard certifiers. So when we had a medical professional that was on the committee, and he did say that there is a little bit of ambiguity. And then also, there's a feeling that we need to be more restrictive as far as who is certifying, the disabled placards for the individuals. And so, again, clarify and be able to be a little bit more restrictive. And number 3, which is the most significant change and probably the greatest thing that we can do to improve accessibility for all users, is creating what's called a 2-tier system. So the top tier would be those that are severely limited. They have severely limited mobility. And so those are essentially, they would have the benefit that they have now, which is to park all day for free. And how do we determine that? If they have very limited walking, if they have very limited reach, they have to use a mobility device to get around, or if they lack the motor skills to be able to operate a meter, such as handling a coin or a credit card. The second tier would be for all other users. So say, for instance, my parents. My parents, they have, they have some disability. They're not able to walk, for instance, a mile, but they do have, disabilities. They would continue to be able to park in blue zones, on street and off street, but they would be forced to pay, and they would be subject to time limits. Now, one of the recommendations that we have is talking about longer time limits for blue zones. So the people that are in the second tier, they could actually have longer time limits than the average user. And that could be handled on a case-by-case basis, depending on how we approach it. So other cities have actually taken their approach, other cities and states have taken the approach of a 2-tier system, and they have seen parking transform overnight, such as Portland and Chicago. So one thing that I want to go ahead and...
Tell me what parking transformed overnight means and looks like.
So for instance, Portland, where they had areas where 30%, the Portland area was occupied by 30% in their downtown. And so that's, again, 30% of the occupied time being used by disabled placards. After the change went into effect, it dropped down to 7%. And so if you actually saw it, I don't have the graphic with me here, but if you saw the graphic, it's tremendous how much parking availability just was transformed overnight and made accessible to the people that need it the most. And then also when it came to the 2-tier system in Portland, whereas you have roughly 8 to 10% that qualify for a disabled placard, after the 2-tier system went into effect, the top tier, only 1% of the people had the top tier placards. The remainder were the second tier. And so again, that's huge as far as being able to make sure that the people that need the parking have the parking available. Other states, Detroit has done something like this, Illinois, but Portland is probably the most recent and best example that we have as far as just how drastic it changed overnight. So the other recommendations that we have are longer time limits in blue zones. So again, say for instance, if we have normally a 2-hour time limit in a blue zone, maybe we make that 4-hour, maybe we make it 6-hour, 10-hour. Another one that we felt was a big win for everybody, especially for the people that need accessibility, was to direct revenue that was gained from the two-tier system towards accessibility improvements. So if we have a transformation of the program and we see revenue generated because of the change in the policy, the additional generation, the revenue generation, would be directed towards accessibility improvements such as curb ramps, improving sidewalks, and making sure that they're not only accessible for vehicles that have drivers that need accessibility, but also vans that need accessibility. So many times there's vans that require greater accommodations to make sure that they can have the motor lift and have equipment that takes out and lands to have the driver or the passenger go onto the sidewalk. Number 6 is to increase the number of blue zones to at least 4% of the metered spaces. So many times it doesn't sound like a lot saying 4%, but right now we have 0% of blue zones in metered spaces. Because right now people with disabled placards are able to park at every single space for free all day. And so if we had the two-tier system, we would transform downtown to creating blue zones so that essentially on every block you'd have at least one blue zone that would be available for those with disabled placards. And also we're looking to increase the number of accessible spaces in off-street facilities. So this could come in different forms. This could be limited to LADOT parking facilities, it could be all city facilities, or it could be a policy that we take to citywide and have for new developments, they have to provide more off-street parking spaces. And then as part of the blue zones, we would also create and install accessible meters and payment technology. So what does that mean? It means that ADA accessible parking meters, so they're going to be a little bit lower. They may have different technology. We're looking to spread the pay-by-phone technology. We're doing other exciting stuff, but before we do that, we would want to make sure that we make it as accessible as possible for those that fall in the second tier. Another option that, or another recommendation, I should say, was to increase the citation amount for accessible parking violations. Right now, our violations are $363, and I believe San Francisco has something closer to about $1,000. And we could easily increase the citation under the CVC for another $100, which is more of almost an administrative action, so that they felt we should actually increase our citation amounts. And then the last one was to improve parking enforcement. Now, everybody agrees that we need to have better parking enforcement, and just to show you how much we've done so far, in 2016 we've conducted over 160 stings. We've cited over 1,400 individuals, and we've confiscated over 640 placards. Yet this is only a drop in the bucket because, as we know, in downtown LA, we have misuse that's taking place every single day. And this is only the stings, and with the stings, the driver has to be present. And many times we are not there to capture and ask the driver if they actually have the registered owner of the placard. So again, enforcement is something that is critical to this, but is not the solution. And so those are all the proposed recommendations that the committee had. And with that, I will be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Just a couple clarifying questions.
Sure.
One thing I wanted to point out is I'm looking at the membership of the committee, and clearly for me, having the disability community represented strongly was key, and I'm glad to see that it was a majority of the committee, and there's some very significant names there. Dr. Fernando Torres-Gil, former BOAC commissioner, professor at UCLA, who's a huge advocate, David Wolf and Teresa De Vera from the Disability Commission, folks from AARP, from the Alzheimer's Association, June Kalis, an independent consultant specializing in disability and access matters. That's a really impressive group that has
we have
worked up
the
these
Caltrans
recommendations.
ADA committee member. We have LAWA ADA committee member.
Yep.
We actually, it was the Department on Disability that led the effort on getting the disabled advocates to have a wide spectrum to make sure all interests were looked out for. And I have to commend Stephen Simon and his staff for picking some terrific individuals who really educated not only me, but the whole group as far as different issues that they have to contend with and bringing a broad set of solutions to what we think is a very complex problem.
And the recommendations here are a combination of things that, some of which the city could do on its own, and many of which we would need state legislation to do that. So this is seeking many of these recommendations to be made as city policy, which if we approved it, CLA would need to put it into a resolution form, as I said the other day, a VOC-approved language, so we can actually vote on it in that form as well.
And I think the majority of these are meant to be implemented after the state policy does change, but there are a few that we can probably just go ahead and take on ourselves.
Please.
So walk me through that, because I was under the same impression that most of these recommendations required changes to state law. For example, your
Yeah.
two-tier system, that might require state law as well. And then I also thought that changing or charging for meter of disabled folks also required state law to change.
You're correct.
Okay. So
Yeah.
then tell me what specific recommendations we would have local control over.
So local control, for instance, we can increase the citation amount now. That's something we can take care of. Improve parking enforcement. When I say improve, really our parking enforcement is doing
Well,
a
we can do that
terrific
for
job.
everything.
Yeah.
Enforcement and anything that we do.
Exactly,
right? I mean,
exactly.
In the city, that's what we lack.
I just want to clarify when I say improve, it's not that they're not doing a good job. It's just being able to maybe have more stings, more resources.
We did triple the number of stings in a single year.
Yeah.
And we've kept up at that rate. So,
So-
but there's a sense from that community that we could be doing more.
Right, and I would agree, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very tricky operation, though, because you have to be there when the driver comes
Sure.
back. And so
Stay and wait
if
around.
people are there for 6 or 7 hours, the stings are more successful when we're in a shopping center, for example, where people are parking in a disabled spot to run in and run out, and that's where we get most of the
Yeah, I can probably
violation.
perform my own sting operation just by witnessing some of this stuff, but I haven't. Have not.
The marketing campaign.
Nine used to do that.
I get close, but I haven't.
So another one is the marketing campaign on the implications of misuse of placards. That's something that we can do now. Something that we're currently already working on is improving payment technology. And so that's something that we can work on, as well as increasing the number of accessible spaces and off-street facilities.
And some of these would have a fiscal impact, right?
Some of those,
Ones-
yes,
yeah, some of those,
absolutely.
okay. All right.
And I would presume that some of the most impactful ones are the ones we need state authorization on.
Do we have an author in mind, or have we already reached out to any legislators that would carry some of this legislation for us?
We are in contact with legislators as well as other cities, and there is interest, but really, I believe people are looking to LA to lead the way.
Well, and we need the city council's blessing before
Yeah.
the department can be empowered to go out and do that advocacy.
But we've at least done the work up in Sacramento where we've identified people that would be able to introduce legislation for us.
We have conversations, but we're limited that we cannot say this is the will of city
Yeah.
council.
I understand.
But yes.
Yeah.
The limiting who can issue the placards or certify them is going to be a key one,
Yes.
as is the authorization for the two-tiered system.
And by the way, I should point out that a member of the committee was actually the Department of Motor Vehicles, Andrew Conway, and he was very essential to educating us on what the current practices are, what the problems they see across the state are.
Excellent.
They
yeah.
also face enforcement issue as well. The
Yes.
DWP in terms of resources and the money allocated for them to do these sting operations.
Absolutely. Enforcement is very difficult. Many cities try to deal with it through enforcement, but it's a problem that's greater than just enforcement.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's pretty clear that the abuse of placards and the sort of scofflaw trading or black market sale of placards is a huge problem in LA. I mean, it's a huge racket.
Yeah. I've going through this process, I've actually heard where you can buy them now. So, not gonna
But
say
he
it
hasn't
publicly.
bought one.
No.
I just want to ask a question.
So he says.
Do you have any idea how much it would cost or what the fiscal impact would be to implement a two-tier system?
We've seen, at least doing how much, it's more how much money have we seen that we're potentially losing at this point? And we estimate just in downtown LA, it's about $6 million a year. And so if we're to take that across the city, it could even approach double digits. Double, I say like over $10 million. So it is a significant problem. Annually, sorry.
Well, I love the idea of having a revenue source for accessibility improvements.
Yes.
That would be key. Mr. Kretz?
Yeah, I was going to ask, I'm glad to hear that DMV was on the committee. How how closely we've worked with them, because it seems like they would be a lot of the source of the problems, especially if they don't limit the number of replacement placards to, say, 3. I mean, you've lost 2 placards after that. The odds that you're actually legitimately losing placard after placard are almost nothing. So whether they could limit that and whether they should be charging an increasing fee. So you lose the first placard, maybe they tack on an extra $25 to what they're doing. You lose a second placard, you should pay $100 more than what they're charging now. And after that, they should just cut it off. That would probably solve a certain portion of it. Also, I don't know with what frequency they validate that the person is still alive, but I have an acquaintance who shall go nameless, whose grandmother died shortly after she got her placard, and he, as an able-bodied person, enjoyed that placard for a number of years. So I know that goes on. It goes on pretty widely, and there should be a better way for them to check in to validate that people are still alive.
Absolutely, and we've heard many cases of even one of my own employees, their relative passed away and they continued to receive a placard and even tried returning the placard to DMV, and even after it was returned, still got another one the following year.
The DMV was the subject of a pretty scathing audit earlier this year, and so they have their own series of recommendations that they're trying to bring to bear, including closing this loophole about linking up the death certificate to their database and making sure that the placards don't continue to go out, and in monitoring the number of placards issued to any individual in a year. So they're certainly now compelled to take some action, but ultimately we think that removing the incentive for abuse is probably going to be the most powerful thing that we can do.
And I will say that the person we've been working with, Andrew Conway from the Department of Motor Vehicles, he's been fantastic. He recognizes what the issues are, and he's been proactively trying to close those loopholes, respond to the audit, and make changes so that we don't continue to have those examples of where people keep on getting, dozens of replacement. People that have passed away are not continuing to get a placard sent to their address. So he is doing a great job.
Honestly, I think the idea that it's easier to do it through enforcement, I think, is really a miss. Obviously, the easiest way you can handle a big chunk of this problem is to cut it off at its source. So if there aren't a bunch of placards operating that no one should have gotten in the first place, that'll get us a good portion of the way towards our goal.
It's worth noting that what we found through our stings is that, yes, there are people who have illegitimate placards, but it's often that the placard is legitimate, but the person who's driving the car is not the person who is associated with the placard. So even, your grandmother has a placard and you use her placard to go to the store. There's a lot of that we see in the stings that we do. So we know that it's both this black market for placards, but it's also just friends and family taking advantage of a family member who has a placard because it's free parking and front row parking.
And years ago, my daughter was paralyzed for 4 months, and she had a handicap placard. She wasn't the driver, but so we could drop her off at the hospital. I can't imagine driving to the grocery store and parking in a handicapped space without her. I would think that would be a pretty serious embarrassment. But if someone gets caught doing that, there should be an aggressive penalty. I also wonder whether the penalties are strong enough, especially for driving with a handicap placard of a person who's deceased. It may be that that should be something closer to a misdemeanor. I think that would turn people's responses around pretty quickly too.
I believe with DMV, they can issue a misdemeanor, but with our parking enforcement, we're not allowed to.
Okay, before we entertain a motion, there are 3 public comment cards. Thank you both. Andrew Thomas, Ms. Autry, and Mr. Herman.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Andrew Thomas. I'm the director of the Westwood Business Improvement District. Hi, Councilmember Koretz, how are you? We're in CD5. I am also the chair of the Los Angeles Business Improvement District Consortium, and it was in that capacity that I served on the Accessible Parking Committee. I can tell you that the committee's work was thorough, thoughtful, sensitive, and very deliberate. The body was representative, and we spent a lot of time weighing on a lot of very serious issues to come to the conclusions that we did. I can also tell you that in my business improvement district in Westwood, we have a very serious issue with meters being occupied by vehicles with handicap placards. It's to the point where our parking is not available for anyone, including the people with severe disabilities, including customers for our businesses. Which costs them revenue, and it costs the city sales tax revenue. And these meters are also not available to generate income for the city, which I know costs a lot of money, which could be going towards accessible reforms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Herman?
So when it comes to blue placard parking, I remind you, I just came from the Department of Disability, DOD, from their 10:30 a.m. Wednesday, October 11, 2017, for the record meeting. And I told them, who the fuck paints all the curbs in LA red and takes away all the parking for people who are disabled? Isn't it a fact that most people who are disabled don't have a quality job that they can pay for fucking parking? Isn't it true that having a consideration for a disabled person with a visible or non-disabled disability should be granted that fucking privilege? Because I have a disability, I have a placard, and hearing your fucking bullshit right now, fuck you, misdemeanor. Give a misdemeanor to those fucking USC asshole football players for stealing them and lying. Perjury, like Herman Jason Wesson. And the same way as I brought her earlier, recall Bonin.
And your time is up. Ms. Autry?
Yes. For the record, I really wanted to encourage you to, but I missed public comment or general public comment, to create more bicycle lanes. I know that that is not relative to this particular item, but we need that especially on 6th Street and 5th Street, not just 7th Street.
Please stick to the handicap placard issue, ma'am.
But just so that's on the record, so it won't be stricken. Now, relative to the handicap placards, I do believe that they are necessary. I'm so grateful for my family and friends that have those. I'm grateful that at 50, almost 51, after 9 car accidents, I still am not physically challenged, thank God. But I am aware and privy to this information that electronic weapons are being used intentionally to cause invasive damage to the spinal column, which generates more money for the pharmaceutical industries, which would generate more money for the city. So that's an exposition of that fact.
Thank you very much.
Right. And these are
thank you.
These are injuries that are being caused on purpose
Mr. Herman,
to
goodbye.
generate more money.
Please escort Mr. Herman from the room.
That's illegal. That's illegal.
Unless there is objection from either of my colleagues, the recommendation of the committee would be to endorse the report, including the 10 recommendations, and to direct the CLA to prepare the appropriate legislative resolution. Mr. Herman is continuing to disrupt this meeting.
I said you should recall Mike Bonin for those rope dives. Recall Bonin. Recall Bonin. Recall Bonin. Fuck your bullshit road dive.
So without objection, that is the direction of the committee?
Sir, could you repeat
Yes, I'll repeat the direction.
Try that again.
Was to endorse the report, including the 10 recommendations, and to direct the CLA to prepare the appropriate legislative resolution for council consideration.
Very good.
Okay, thank you. And that brings us to item number 7.
Item number 7 is a joint CAO-CLA report relative to the street reconstruction and Vision Zero 2017-18 budget.
No, she's switching out the seats. Yeah.
You gotta do what you gotta do.
This was with the musical chairs here.
All right, this is quite the high-powered panel here today. So just by way of introduction, for those who haven't been glued to the issue of Vision Zero on a daily basis, during this year's budget deliberations, the council had a very substantive discussion about both SB1 funds and Measure M funds and how to accomplish twin imperatives for the city of Los Angeles, one of which was to repair and rebuild our streets and make them safe for all users, and the other was how to implement the mayor's executive directive, which the council has endorsed, for Vision Zero, and to help address the public health crisis that is deaths and serious collisions, serious injury collisions on our roadways. And one of the directions of the council when it approved the budget was to have the various departments work together on program details, selection of projects, and how to move forward. And particularly important in the council deliberation was how to dovetail road reconstruction and Vision Zero where those two imperatives met. They don't always meet, but sometimes they do. And part of the goal of, I think, of the council was to make sure that if we need to work on a street to fix a failed street, we shouldn't be coming back 3 years later and re-engineering the street for Vision Zero. We want to do everything together at the same time. So the report before us today is the first real substantive report since then, collaboration between all the various agencies. My understanding is this has gone to Mr. Koretz's committee and the Public Works on which Ms. Martinez sits. So they've heard this before. For me, it's sort of new. So who's going to take the lead in making the presentation?
I can start. Matthias Farfan with the Chief Legislative Analyst's Office. That was a great summary, by the way. And the report before you is a joint CAO-CLA report that addresses those exact instructions from City Council. City Council did set aside $44 million in Measure M and Special Gas Tax SB1 funds. Working with the departments before you today, Transportation, Engineering, Street Services. We also worked with Personnel Department, City Attorney, and Mayor in preparing this report. The way it was prepared was with those goals in mind of where those two programs dovetail. While DOT started off with, they have identified 40 priority corridors within the high energy network. That became the universe of projects to look at. And within those projects, within those locations, then Street Services identified which of those corridors, how much reconstruction work was required on each of those, and then also engineering was involved, and they all worked together to narrow that list of 40 priority corridors down to a list of 17. Within the 17, they were further narrowed down to 6, which would be addressed, which would be the first 6 that would be addressed as we move forward. There's also, since these projects do include SB1 funds, the guidelines from the state have been finalized. To be eligible for those funds, the city is required to submit a list of SB1 projects to the state by October 16th. So this report does include a list of SB1 projects that we're asking council to adopt. So then CAO will be authorized to send those to the state so we can be eligible for the SB1 funds when they start coming in late January. The report also redistributes $19.5 million in Measure M funds, and that's the ramp-up costs for these projects, the street reconstruction program and Vision Zero program. The departments have been instructed by Public Works Department to report back in 30 days with the additional resources that will be needed. This report only allocates the Measure M funds. The SB1 funds that were in the adopted budget still haven't been allocated, and that report back then would include the programming of those funds, assuming council approves those 6 projects as the ones Bureau of Engineering and DOT are supposed to proceed with the design work on. Aside from that, the report does include resources for DOT for striping workload. It also includes resources for street services, so they can perform citywide bicycle lane repair and maintenance work that's required. As I mentioned, or you mentioned, the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee reviewed the report. They included additional recommendations. There was a recommendation in there to also, as we proceed and other projects are prioritized in the future, that also projects that are viewed that have a high risk associated with them as far as liability claims, that also be a criteria in selecting future projects.
As I noted previously, I think once we have articulated that something is on the high injury network,
Yes.
we have a potential for a liability claim. We need to fix it. So
I agree. And there's also instructions to report back on the hiring of the positions that are included in this report if they're approved. PA is recommending that departments report back every 30 days on the status of the hiring of those positions and the filling positions. Other than that, I don't know if CAO has something to add.
I'm David Hirano with the Office of CAO. That was a good summary. I think the only thing I would add is I think before you have the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee reports. With the committee report actually includes all the recommendations from this joint CAO-CLA report, plus those instructions added by the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee. In addition, you have the Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee report, and I think we're fine with all of the recommendations, except we'd like to talk to you about potentially amending recommendation 1B on the Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee report.
what recommendation is that?
The recommendation would be to instruct the CAO to increase the number of signage crews to address these projects and the backlog. That instruction is too vague and too broad to give us real direction on where to go. So we've talked with Mr. Englander, who brought this up in committee, and would like the opportunity to report back separately within the next 30 days on this item, so we don't lose it, but create a more defined recommendation or set of recommendations that could address these problems.
That sounds fine. I don't think there's any objection to that. I would also, though, want us to do a similar recommendation for something else that I think is missing in the report. It's an exceptional report, but something else is missing, and that is the appropriate resources to install the signals and the street lighting changes that are dictated by Vision Zero. One of the things that was most popular in the Vision Zero budget among council was the signals. And that's going to need likely some positions and some revenue. So I'd also ask CAO, DOT, and BSL to report back in that same 30-day time period as you do on the signage on the requested additional positions to install the Vision Zero-related lighting and to verify the need, or or recommend the potential funding for that. I don't know if that would be SB1 or M.
Yeah, most likely. Yes, we have no problem with that. That's actually our preferred alternative. So, thank you.
Yeah. I also understand that we need a technical amendment to one of the recommendations from Public Works Committee. One of the projects just needs to be described better. It's described as a 7th Street project, and it should be 7th Street from Figueroa to Alameda.
That was a request from the council office, so yeah, we're going to change that.
Okay.
Yeah. From Figueroa to Alameda, it says Olive right now, I think. So,
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Nazario, Gary, Salita, anything you want to add?
I'll just add this. This is Salita Reynolds. So there have been some questions about sort of the methodology that we use to come up with the high injury network and the 40 priority corridors. So I just want to sort of underline the fact that the high injury network methodology is a best practice methodology that it's been recognized by the National Academy of Sciences. It's used by several other cities, not just Los Angeles. We take 5 years of collision data and we use it to map out the highest concentrations of crashes, severe and fatal crashes, for people walking and biking in the city. So we have we have been very transparent about that on the Vision Zero website and on the GeoHub You can you can download the data sets that we use. You can download a gigantic technical appendix to our safety report that goes into excruciating detail, if that's your thing, about how we actually came up with the lines on the map. We also went through an exercise where, to the extent possible, to the extent that we could get them, we mapped out liability payouts that the city had made over the last 3 years to make sure that the high injury network was capturing some of those. The high injury network is a living thing. We update it every year. In fact, we've come up with an update of it this year. So there are certain segments that drop off. There are other new segments that show up as we add new years' worth of data. The 40 corridors we selected using 3 criteria. We did a lot of outreach to make sure we were choosing the right criteria. We did outreach to the Vision Zero Alliance, the Executive Steering Committee of the city. We also put it online and got over 500 pieces of individual feedback on which criteria we should use to select the 40 priority corridors. Again, something that we will revisit every year, right? This is a living document, and hopefully our goal is that these streets are coming off of the high injury network, and that slowly over time it's shrinking because of the efforts that we've undertaken. But I've had a few questions about that, both in previous committees and outside, so I just wanted to make sure that I took the opportunity to put that on the record.
So, just a couple questions for you. During the deliberations on Vision Zero and on the budget this year, one thing became abundantly clear if you look at maps of the high injury network, is that there's a tremendous equity issue in the city of Los Angeles, chunks of the city that have historically been underinvested in, where people are more likely to die. Of the 17 projects, how did we do on that metric?
So the corridors themselves already include a criteria that they are top 40 because we used an equity lens in the actual ranking. And I think you can see as you look, there's a high concentration in South LA, and there's also some streets in East LA in the Valley, but really South LA, and when you look at a map of where people are getting injured and killed, you know, there's just a tremendous density of corridors and intersections in South LA where that's happening. So you can see that when you look at the geographic areas that each of those streets capture. And the other thing that we did, and we all sat in a room and we looked at the map of failed streets, and we looked at, you know, which one of the corridors on the list of 40 has a big segment that's failed, right? Yeah. So there are a lot of those 40 corridors. We're still doing safety work on those corridors, but they may just not have as much as long of a distance of failed streets as the ones that sort of made it to the top. So it really does represent a list of the worst in terms of where people are getting injured and killed, and the worst of the worst in terms of where there are failed streets.
Yeah. I would just
go ahead, Gary.
Gary Lee Moore, city engineer. I would just back up what Salita said. Of the 6 corridors that we recommended, 47% had poor and failed streets of those high injury networks. So it's a very high percentage of poor and failed streets within that high injury network for those 6 segments that we recommended.
I just had one quick question, and I did ask several questions in Public Works Committee, so I'm not going to repeat myself, but are there any reconstruction work completed that is not associated to the Vision Zero corridors, or any, or that is not on the SB1 list of projects?
At this point, the reconstruction segments that have been identified are part of Vision Zero SB1.
So there is none that are.
There is nothing outside this program right now.
From either one, from the Vision Zero corridor and the list of projects associated to SB1.
Correct, although my understanding is that there is a separate work program for concrete streets that is also in here, that's on a separate track. And then, of course, every year the city continues to resurface or slurry, you know, over 2,000 lane miles of streets, and that program will continue as well. There will also be Vision Zero work that will continue that's not in here, right? That's signal work and other things that we'll do.
Nazario, anything you want to add?
No, I just wanted to basically support what Salida just said. Basically, we have the normal pavement preservation program, which a main objective is to maintain the streets in fair to excellent condition, in that condition. And this Vision Zero / SB1 program will also address reconstruction. So these are two programs, although separate, they're working. They're on the same trajectory.
Mr. Koretz, any questions?
No, I just, although I've already done it in committee, just to remind you again to keep an eye on the local hiring process and to use that as actively as possible as you move forward.
I had one last question for you, and I don't have very concrete thoughts on this. I'm just sort of teasing at something. There's an incredible need to get stuff done this fiscal year, to have deliverables, to show the public, to show Safe Streets advocates, to show people who voted for Measure M and who supported SB1 that we're actually delivering. So clearly there needs to be an oversight mechanism to do that. On the other hand, sort of the competing issue is you don't want the department so focused on making a report to a body that they're actually not getting the work done, and sometimes that can happen. So can someone describe to me what the oversight mechanism is here?
The oversight mechanism recommended in the joint report would be to use the Street and Transportation Project Oversight Committee that was established by Council several years back. It's a committee that is represented by the Mayor's Office, the Chief Legislative Analyst's Office, and our office, and works really hard to try and help the departments break down barriers to project completion, identify resource needs, make recommendations to Council when necessary. But to the greatest extent possible, tries to just focus on removing barriers to project completion. So very few reports get generated to that oversight body, so there isn't a lot of staff time put into doing complex reports, but there is a lot of time spent identifying issues and looking for ways to improve project completion. And so we thought that would be an appropriate forum to address any issues that arise from the combination of these two important programs.
What else does that body do?
It reviews the transportation grant program and helps the departments focus on the transportation grant program and completing projects there and eliminating barriers to project completion. Many of the barriers that we see are actually barriers in communication or cooperation, or require just joint focus of the CAO, CLA, and Mayor to help the departments overcome. But so far it's been mostly focused on the transportation grant arena.
And how do we oversee and monitor coordination for sidewalks and street repair?
Sidewalks, the oversight body for the City Council is the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee, but the oversight for the program itself is from the City Engineer, and the City Engineer has a monthly meeting that he uses to coordinate everyone together, and as well as other lower level meetings as well. So
why not use that model?
That could be used. In fact, we've actually talked about using something very similar. The difference is the street reconstruction program in this case is a program being run by a city engineer, and the Vision Zero program is one that's clearly being run by DOT. So you have two overlapping programs that are being coordinated together in one instance. And it's slightly different structure, so we thought there might be a benefit to having a slightly different oversight structure. But we could definitely explore the current structure that Gary is using for this as well.
What do the GMs think?
I mean, the what is it 2,200?
2,200.
The 2,200 lane mile program is another program that requires tremendous coordination among Bureau of Street Services, DOT, and other departments. That's done through a working group. DOT also participates in the coordination, and BSS and through the coordination for the sidewalk program. And those, for us, those are both, those models both function really well. 2,200, sorry, Nazario. In particular, I think is a pretty stellar example of a working group that is maybe less formal, and therefore, we accomplish quite a bit in those forums. The Street POC committee may be a good place to do that as well, but having the departments be able to collaborate and work together in a working group format that's a little more casual and a little less structured, I think has been a proven model in other areas. So, as far as we're concerned, at least I don't have any issues with the way that those other models have been working for us.
On the sidewalk committee, we also invite council offices, CAO, CLA, and mayor's office to our meetings. Yeah. So we're inclusive into how the sausage is made.
Well, that's a plus from the council perspective, yes. Particularly given the sensitivity of a lot of these projects. That's certainly a plus.
Councilmember, I think I've been in many of these meetings, and I agree with Salida's assessment of the effectiveness of the 2400 meetings. The one deficiency in the 2400 meeting is that the CLA and council offices are not there. It's run through the mayor's office, and the mayor's staff does a fantastic job in doing it, but the CLA and mayor staff are not in the room during those meetings. In Gary's meetings, they are in the room, and so that is additional benefit.
So is there a necessity in the council action? This goes to council on Friday, yes?
Yes.
Is there a necessity to make the designation of the oversight body then, or can we in the 30-day report back get an explanation of the 3 different models we just heard?
Yes. Okay. You can wait to the 30-day report back.
Okay. So let me then see if I can summarize the proposed recommendations. One would be to concur with the other committee reports, with the exception of item number 4 for designated the committee, and instead in 30 days ask this group to report back with an analysis and recommendations of the 3 different oversight options that we use for infrastructure projects. 2 would be to make that technical amendment that the council office has requested regarding 7th Street, the boundaries of it. 3 would be Mr. Englander's requested 30-day report back on the signage. And 4 would be my requested 30-day report back on the signals in the street lighting.
Okay.
Work for everybody?
Yes, and Councilmember, to be clear, in the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee report, the STPOC recommendation was changed to number 8.
Okay.
So just for the city clerk, so you know which one.
Okay.
So, Councilmember, I'd like to make a couple of closing comments from our office perspective. One, I want to remind you that this is going to be a dynamic process. This is the first report, but we know whenever we start major programs like this that we have to fine-tune as we go, and so we intend to come back not only with a 30-day report, but as needed subsequent to make adjustments and to ask for additional authorities. I expect we should be back several times this year, and in the budget we'll make further adjustments.
We're desperately going to need that. We can't just wait until the Budget Committee meets in April and then get surprised by stuff.
Yeah, and then the final thing is this is time sensitive if we want to be able to position ourselves to receive the $28 million in SB1 money, so we do need council action to approve that list at a minimum on Friday.
Yes.
So we need your help in securing a placeholder on the council agenda for Friday and getting it through. and then my staff will take care of filing everything by Monday.
That's already taken care of.
Already been done.
Okay, thank you.
See, we're more dynamic than you expected, Dave.
You're awesome.
We have one public comment card before we do a vote from Jessica Meany from Investing in Place.
Good afternoon, council members.
Hello.
Jessica Meany from Investing in Place. Councilmember Nuri Martinez, I really want to thank you for when you spoke at our Tripping Point conference in June. We're now holding a similar conference in the Valley actually in 2 weeks. Really why I'm here today is I love this item. I love this coordinated work that we see going on in the three departments working together with equity at the heart of it, prioritizing using data. My big ask though is what are we doing about sidewalks? And I appreciate you, Councilmember, bringing that up. But one of the reasons we've been holding these Tripping Point conferences is we want to accelerate our sidewalk repair and construction program as well as our buses. And can you imagine if we were doing this program and we were actually, where we're including potholes and safety and data, and we actually were going from not just curb to curb, but sidewalk to sidewalk? The city is in desperate need of a sidewalk strategic plan so that we can leverage resources like SB1 and Measure M and not wait 30 years like the Willett settlement asks us to, but to fix it in 10 and prioritize based on need. So I just ask you to consider that as we move this program forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's an item we'll take up, we'll address when it comes back in 30 days, just so we can have a more of a pointed discussion on that.
Hear from Council District Kent.
I would recommend we.
This one yet?
Oh, yeah.
You're too dynamic for me now. Without objection, the recommendation of the committee is as I explained it a few minutes ago, and as staff helped correct, Matthias helped correct. So the only item left on the calendar is item 3. CD10 is not here, so we'll continue item 3 until the next meeting, because that needs a public hearing and some testimony from the council office or LAPD to move forward. Without any further ado, we are adjourned.